If you want to listen to the radio in Montgomery, there's 13 AM and FM stations to choose from. The programming runs the gamut from hard rock to 1940s big band style music.
A lot of people get their news from radio. Most listen in the morning when they're just waking up or in their car on the way to work. Because there's so many stations, the competition for listeners is tough. And when businesses start spending, they look for the radio station that delivers the most listeners to get the most from their advertising dollar. Like television, radio is rated several times a year. These ratings supposedly telling advertisers which stations you're listening to. One of these rating periods is the 4 months between March and June. During ratings, stations bombard listeners with all kinds of promotions and hold contests, giving away prizes including cash, appliances, and vacation trips. Most of the contests are honest and above board, and strict rules are followed. One of the rules says that any station advertising a contest must fully and accurately disclose the terms of the contest and conduct the contest as promoted and advertised. At least 4 people have charged that during the last rating period, this wasn't the case at WQIM in Prattville. These people who conducted some of the contests say there were violations of the FCC rules.
He said he was going to take the 20th caller or whatever and give them whatever. And then we usually did not get enough callers. So we would just have to take, count by 2s or 3s to get up to that number.
I think it was about number 24 or whatever. It was in the 20s, and I was told to take that number, but count by 2s. So I didn't take the actual caller.
You just skip numbers and go up until just however many you want to skip, just and go up until
Have you ever
get to
done
that
that?
number. Yes, I have several times.
I remember one time it was number 86, caller number 86, and I probably took caller number 40 correctly. Number 40 was probably the person that I took. And they would keep calling in until he went over the air and said, "I've got a winner." And by the time he, went over the air with it, I'd already gotten in, probably the correct caller, number 86. But I'd have to say, we've already got a winner. Try again next hour.
Would the proper person, the person who would number 86 ever win, or number 20 ever win, or?
If the charges are taken to the FCC and upheld, the station stands to suffer heavy fines or even lose its license. But Program Director Frenchie B. denies all charges. He says he's never ordered anyone to rig a contest and says he doesn't know why anyone would make such a charge. The station's top management is conducting its own investigation into the question and has declined to comment until it's completed. This is Norman Lumpkin, WSFA TV News reporting.
A reversal of this trend is long overdue. That is why I am a candidate for the Alabama Supreme Court. Invasion of power will be put out by no activity is immune from the long arm of the courts. And every year brings new avenues of court involvement.
You play. What an important role you play. If you set a job right on the street.
Police officer forward.
Back a little bit there.
I guess we're just Corporal Sergeant J. Time.
The Public Service Commission has no real power. In fact, the PSC is now simply a preliminary hearing for the Supreme Court. For this reason, it is important that we have a judge on the Supreme Court who has experience and understanding of the utility rate regulation process. Gotten away from their intended purpose. Courts are only supposed to interpret the law. Instead, our courts have gotten into the business of making law. The courts interfere.
This was our lunar orb as seen this morning shortly before 1 o'clock, just as it was passing into the Earth's shadow. And scientists assure us it was not, according to some legend, being eaten by a sky-dwelling frog. In 1859, the moon put on a similar performance, and we can't expect an encore until the next century. What makes this total eclipse special is its length, 1 hour and 46 minutes. One reason is that the moon is near the most distant point it ever reaches in its orbit around the Earth, and thus takes longer to pass through the center of the Earth's shadow. The moon you see here is slightly red because of dust in the Earth's atmosphere, put there by volcanic eruptions on the island of Java and in Mexico. The total eclipse officially began at 1:38 a.m. our time and ended at 3:24 a.m. Unlike a solar eclipse, scientists say this morning's lunar eclipse was safe to view with the naked eye. Did you watch the lunar eclipse this morning?
I watched every bit of it.
How did you like it?
I loved it. Well, I was up, but I wasn't out in the backyard.
I thought it was very nice. I enjoyed it. I got mighty sleepy.
I wanted to get up and see it, but I neglected to set the alarm.
Dennis Latham, WSFA TV News.
Come on, sir. Thank you, Jesus. You know it's a blessing to be here. Yes, it is. Oh, yeah, it's a blessing to be here. Lead us somewhere in a dying hour. How much? Let us lay.
So we are trying to fight crime through the Word of God and lifting up Jesus Christ. Make the people aware that better things exist than what we see on the TV every night.
This is the scene, Kilby Prison. Mark Ellard has been here since May when the state of Georgia sent him here for the reconsideration hearing. The plot is the future of Mark Ellard. Was his parole legal and should it be rescinded?
Attorney General Charles Braddock says Ellard should never have been paroled in the first place because of the severity of his crimes and because the parole board didn't have complete information on Ellard when they let him out. Braddock says while Ellard was immediately transferred to Georgia to serve a life sentence, there's no provision under Alabama law for retainers, and Ellard could have been out walking the streets. Attorneys for Ellard, Ralph Knowles and Ira Burnham, say Ellard was legally paroled, and there's no basis for tomorrow's hearing. In fact, Burnham says he's not sure what questions will be asked or answered.
Burnham says tomorrow's hearing will be a classic situation of the Board of Pardons and Paroles acting as both prosecutor and judge. Well, do you think the parole board members have already made their mind up?
I think so.
The hearing begins at 9
When will you
o'clock
know
at Kilby Prison.
as far as
Gina Gregory, WSFA
is it up to you
TV
this
News.
step now? Is Judge Warner going to do anything until?
The allegation that vestiges of segregation still existed in Alabama's institutions of higher education came from the Department of Education some 18 months ago. The state was given a December 1981 deadline to correct the alleged problem, but a series of meetings between university presidents and the governor still hadn't netted any solution when the deadline rolled by. The issue was then turned over to the Justice Department. Today, the governor's office received a letter from the justice officials who say they want a closed meeting with university and state officials during the week of July 19th. The justice letter says the meeting will cover three primary issues: student access and enrollment, faculty and staff recruitment, and the question of who, if anyone, should have governance over all colleges and universities in the state. Justice officials say other issues dealing with duplicative programs and facilities in Montgomery and Huntsville will be dealt with separately. The university presidents had initially drafted a proposed solution, which the governor felt was too weak. Now, Justice Department officials will be involved in the implementation and monitoring of any solution, and if the situation with other states similarly monitored by the Justice Department is a judge, the desegregation of higher education in Alabama could last for more than a decade. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
And there's more and more
Governor James summoned the lawmakers to
understand it,
Montgomery to consider passing his
familiar
retirement
with it.
reform measure. The governor said passage of that bill would save as much as $40 million a year in
I'd saw a
retirement
piece of
costs,
legislation
money
like
that
that.
could be used to
I
install
would grab that
kindergartens,
thing
build
and I would
roads,
get on
or
that
fund
floor.
pay raises. But the issue wasn't popular among state employees, teachers, or lawmakers who think about the political clout carried by teachers and employers. organizations. So the retirement issue virtually died from a lack of movement. Instead, the lawmakers worked hard to pass some popular issues, property tax relief bills. 3 of them were passed, and ironically, all were passed with most legislators knowing full well they were doomed to die at the hands of the courts or the governor. The reason? Tax relief measures would further put a strain on already tight state budgets. One tax relief measure sought to delay a federal court-ordered reappraisal of property values. Many legislators acknowledging the likelihood the federal courts wouldn't put up with that bill, they passed a second bill doubling the homestead exemption, again knowing they had passed this bill at a time when they couldn't override a veto from the governor, which he's indicated he'll do. The third tax relief bill mandates local counties to roll back taxes if they realize more than a 15% increase in property tax revenues once taxes are equalized by reappraisal. Again, the governor is expected to veto the measure. All 3 bills were dead-end bills because of the threat of the governor's veto or court action, but they all passed overwhelmingly. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
15 defense attorneys are representing the 18 suspects. Today, several lawyers filed motions asking Judge Truman Hobbs to suppress evidence in the case, linking 2 of the 3 places where 4 suspects were arrested. 2 of those places include rooms at the Holiday Inn East in Montgomery and in Opelika. At the lodge in Opelika, federal prosecutors claim the alleged return pilots William Newbern and Robert Shepard were arrested last March 22nd, the same night FBI and state investigators seized the DC-4 plane. Lawyers say the defendants were arrested without warrants. Agents also confiscated a sports coach motorhome with a Florida license plate at the KOA campground in Hope Hall. Agent Ken Halford testified he did not have a search warrant when he and 3 other agents entered the vehicle. Halford says the warrants were signed and issued the next day. Evelyn Boynton, the wife of James Boynton, one of the suspects on trial, was arrested when the vehicle was seized. Agents say the suspects used the motorhome to hook up radio equipment to make contact with ties in Colombia, South America. Judge Hobbs took the motions under advisement and granted attorney David Byrne's request to try Jacques Tremblay separately on the grounds of conflict of interest.
The trial is expected to last at least 2 weeks, and as many as 70 witnesses are expected to take the stand. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News at the Federal Courthouse.
States. One judge can exercise more power than the U.S. Congress. One judge can exercise more power. It seems that nothing is sacred anymore. No activity is immune from the long arm of the courts. And every year brings new avenues of court involvement. Our founding fathers placed a system of checks and balances in our government. But today, the power of the courts goes unchecked, and the system is out of balance. President of the United States.
Thank you, Jesus. You know, it's a blessing to be here. Yes, it is. Oh, yeah, it's a blessing to be here.
I had many people to call my home and was telling me that I'm not alone, or we're not alone in this fasting, people who didn't even come out to the celebrations, white and black. We send out a leaflet to the churches, and the announcement that was announced in the churches, I think, had effect on the members.
Nancy Kahn is the woman who survived an attack by Ellard and has been backing Attorney General Charles Graddick's attempts to have Ellard's parole rescinded.
During the hearing, Graddick says he'll call Mrs. Kahn to testify, along with an inmate who told Graddick that he provided Ellard with a gun and that Ellard told the inmate he wanted to use the gun to take care of Mrs. Kahn.
Attorneys for Ellard say there's no basis for the hearing because Ellard was legally paroled and he hasn't violated it. They say the only reason the hearing has been scheduled is political pressure from the Attorney General, who threatened the parole board if they didn't bring Ellard back for a reconsideration hearing.
Graddick denies that politics was used, but he doesn't deny that he used pressure to get a hearing. He says Mark Ellard should not have been paroled and that the parole board should be made aware of its error. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News at Kilby Prison.
This is all that's left of the house at 511 Gardenia Court in the Grandview Pines area near Millbrook. An early morning fire destroyed the house and nearly all of its contents. And today, as neighbors looked at the smoldering ruins of the home, many were angry because they say it took nearly 30 minutes for the Millbrook Fire Department to respond to calls for help.
Then we called the Montgomery Fire Department and asked them to help us.
She knew her neighbors
they
were
tried
out
to
of
call
town when
Millbrook
she
and
and her
could not
family
get an
saw
answer.
people near the house at 1
So
o'clock this
he
morning.
promised to say,
She says at 1:30, she and her husband walked over to the house and found it was on fire.
so we got our hose pipes, tried to put it out, and called the Millbrook Fire Department. Nobody answered. So then we called the Montgomery Fire Department and asked them to.
At the Millbrook Fire Emergency number, she called other area fire officials, and a short while later, fire trucks arrived from Prattville and the Elmore Volunteer Fire Department.
Some of the neighbors went down to the Millbrook police office and found the dispatcher and an officer standing outside watching the moon eclipse. They had no idea that we'd even been trying to call. And this had
Ms.
gone on about 30 minutes.
The fire, quote, exploded through the house. And by the time Millbrook firefighters arrived, nearly a half hour after the fire was discovered, the house was engulfed in flames. Late today, Millbrook Mayor Reginald Minter met with other city officials to try to figure out just what happened.
We do know that the radio operators were slow in their response, and we should have been there sooner, and we were not. But if we'd have got there on time, I don't think under circumstances we could have saved the house. I am looking into this. I'm getting reports from all the department heads, and we are taking this action to straighten out to see that it doesn't happen again.
Minter says a dispatcher is always on duty at City Hall to handle emergency calls and contact members of the volunteer fire department. Minter says there were, quote, errors on the part of our people, and the state fire marshal is investigating the blaze. Reporting from Grandview Pines, Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
During most of the morning, several defense attorneys argued for a motion to suppress evidence in the case. Attorneys claim agents did not have search and arrest warrants when 4 of the 18 suspects were arrested. Several investigators testified that one of the suspects, William James Boynton, went with them March 9th to the airstrip near Hurtsboro to see if it would accommodate a DC-6 aircraft. 13 days later, agents confiscated a DC-4 aircraft loaded with marijuana. Also that day, investigators arrested 4 suspects at the Holiday Inn East in Montgomery and in Opelika, but lawyers claimed the investigators did not have probable cause to arrest the defendants since agents did not have proper warrants. Investigators also seized a sports coach motorhome allegedly outfitted with radio equipment to make contact with ties in Colombia, South America. The trial, which continues tomorrow, is expected to last at least 2 weeks. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News at the Federal Courthouse.
Good friends of education, only to have them come down here. And the vast majority of the candidates that we've been involved with, we've helped elect them. Now, of course, once you elect them, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to remain loyal to what they said they were. Many times we've elected people thinking that they were good friends of education, only to have them come down here and not vote for education a single time.
But you remember them next time around?
We'll definitely remember them.
In February of 1980, Eastern Airlines announced it would no longer provide passenger service to Montgomery. Eastern also decided to stop paying rent on space it had leased at Danley Field through 1983. Then rent payments continued before a lawsuit could be litigated. But the airline later stopped payments again, and again the authority talked of legal action, and again Eastern started paying the rent. Well, as you might have guessed, Eastern isn't paying its rent again, and the Montgomery Airport Authority has filed a suit in circuit court again. Fred Enslin, a member of the Montgomery Airport Authority, says the rent squabble began when the federal government deregulated the airlines.
As the authority, we feel like we owe an obligation to the public to find out what this lease really means and the rights of the parties under it. Of course, it's an unfortunate situation. We wish Eastern was still here, but that was their election, not ours.
A spokesman for Eastern Airlines in Miami says they haven't seen a copy of the suit. Dennis Latham, WSFA TV News.
And qualified with the Democratic Party to seek the nomination as Public Service Commissioner, place number 2. C. I went to Birmingham and I put my money on the table to qualify, placed on disability retirement. I took a 10-point veterans preference because of it. I did that on my promotion. I'd like to know why. I don't have to apologize to Mr. Folsom. I have asked the incumbent to explain his connections with the utility and coal industry last week, and we've heard no reply. I asked him to explain why the commission had not audited the companies. We've heard total silence. Today, I'm going to ask him why he's afraid to answer. Has he got something else to hide? Today, I'll ask him another question. Has he or his assistant ever asked the PSC staff to take it easy on a utility because he expected campaign funds from that utility?
Ellard was in jail.
Attorney General Charles Graddick calls the Pardons and Parole Board incompetent for granting Ellard a parole in March of 1981.
They did not have that information.
And Graddick doesn't deny that he used pressure to bring Ellard back to Alabama for a
they have
reconsideration
information where he had escaped.
Graddick told board members that he doesn't blame them for paroling Ellard because Graddick says they were operating on incomplete information.
They have information where he had escaped. That they did not have before, that he had committed other criminal acts while out on escape. They have information that Ellard had simply threatened to do away with the witness that is existing now, and that's Ms. Kahn. I think the decision they made showed in the depositions that they wouldn't have made it had they known what they know now.
Ellard was convicted in May of 1972 for the murder of Charlotte Parks and the beating of her cousin, Nancy Kahn. Mrs. Kahn is the only surviving victim of Ellard's attacks. She says she doesn't feel good about the whole hearing process for rescinding Ellard's parole. But she says Ellard's attorneys don't have anything to stand on.
Because I don't think anybody in their right mind is going to think too much of an attorney that wants to represent somebody like him and thinks he's been so good that he should be out. I mean, in a way, where that just narrows it down to say consider the source, you know. So I'm not really that worried about his lawyers.
Said there were threats.
As for the incomplete
and said
information,
that the parole
Ellard's
board
attorneys
quickly
say
thereafter
everything was
reacted
already
to
in
him.
Ellard's
So,
file when the board
I don't
granted
think
his
there's any question
parole
about
back in
that. It was in
1981.
1977,
And they challenged the
6
board
months,
not to fall victim to public outcry
understood
or
that Mr.
pressure
Ellard had
from
a
the
sentence
Attorney
to be
General
served in
in
Georgia,
doing
and
their
of course,
job.
That's exactly.
So Mark Ellard will remain here at Kilby Prison at least for a little while longer. Lawyers for both sides now say the parole board has a complete evaluation of the Ellard case. But the question is, was that information on hand when the parole board initially gave Ellard his parole? Ellard's attorneys say yes, but Graddick says no. And now lawyers have 1 week to submit depositions relating to the case before the parole board makes its decision on rescinding Mark Ellard's parole. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News at Kilby Prison.
Ridicule you, like they would say that we were fanatics and we were cranks and that we were using it for commercial. I don't believe that our founding fathers ever intended that we should erase God from our public life. What I believe was intended there was that the state could not dictate any particular form of worship or any church, any particular denomination or religious persuasion could take over the dictation of what would, be taught. But I don't think, but to take God out of our national life, to take God off of our bills, in God we trust, to take the Bible away from the oath that is taken during a presidential inauguration, that's taking away our roots, the way we were founded by our founding fathers.
Palmer opened his new campaign headquarters in Birmingham and signed the papers that officially put him in the governor's race.
The next governor of the state of Alabama, Emory Palmer.
Both moves were greeted with applause. Palmer made a brief address to several dozen supporters on hand to help get the ball rolling in Jefferson County. He stuck to many of the same statements he's made before about what is and isn't needed in state government. He called for new leadership and less of the politics and politicians of the past.
I don't believe that they can solve the problems because they have been the problem. Everyone. They're all running telling you how many years of experience that they have. I submit to you that their experience is their indictment.
There were Palmer T-shirts and Palmer buttons, even a Palmer victory sheet, a place for people to pledge their support for the election. Palmer moved through the crowd shaking hands and getting verbal pledges. It's a scene that may be repeated many times in the next few months. As the most densely populated county in the state, Jefferson County receives a lot of political attention. Palmer says winning votes there will take a lot of hard work, but it can be done. Reporting from Birmingham, Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
The two employees that you have in question have been relieved of their duty. Letters were delivered to them last night.
Does that mean now they're fired or terminated from the city?
They are terminated from the city, yes, sir.
The two city employees were criticized by some Grandview Pine residents for not answering the phone at the police department when residents tried to report a house fire. The blaze was discovered in a two-story house in the Elmore County subdivision about 1:30 Tuesday morning. One resident says she let the phone ring 15 times. When she didn't get an answer, she says she called again, but still didn't get an answer after the phone rang another 15 times. Another neighbor says she drove to police headquarters and found the two city employees standing outside the building watching the eclipse of the moon. Residents say they called the Montgomery Fire Department to ask for help, and they in turn called the Prattville and Elmore Fire Departments, who answered the call, with both arriving at the scene before the Millbrook units were dispatched. Mayor Minter says the Millbrook firemen were not to blame for being late to the fire.
Fire department was totally not to blame. The fire department depends on the radio operator to notify them. The radio room is to handle all emergencies, whether it's a fire, police,
an emergency in the city, any kind of emergency. That's what we have full-time, around-the-clock radio operators handle all emergencies. And they do receive and report, and we have a little computer they can punch out and give a description of the area where the fire's at, show the maps where the fire plugs. We have a little computer that gives them a picture of all this. They can take it with them. And this is the problem. The fire department was not notified.
Mentor says steps are being taken to prevent an occurrence of this type from happening again in Millbrook. Matt Carmack, WSFA TV News.
Palmer opened his new Birmingham campaign headquarters in the same building on the same floor as the Alabama Republican Party headquarters. That made signing qualifying papers easy.
So there we are.
Thank you, sir.
Now,
And so far, he hasn't had to face any competition for the Republican nomination. No one else is qualified for the race. But today, he showed supporters at his headquarters he's not waiting until the primaries are over before campaigning for the governor's office itself.
how you doing? Nice to see you. Thank you for being here.
Palmer says he's been traveling all over the state, meeting people, shaking hands, and making speeches.
So I think that new leadership is the big issue in this campaign of who can provide that new leadership that will lead Alabama into the 80s instead of back to the 60s or wherever. Now,
there were no real surprises in Palmer's address. He said very little he hasn't said before. But he did break new ground in another way. With campaign headquarters in Birmingham, Palmer has formally expanded his campaign to Jefferson County, the most densely populated county in the state. Palmer says it will be important to his race. Today he asked supporters to spread the word of his campaign to convince others to support what he calls new leadership. In his own words, it's not going to be easy, but it can be done. Reporting from Birmingham, Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
About 10 teachers representing the political action wing of AEA questioned incumbent Representative Thomas Reed and his challenger George Clay, but reporters weren't allowed in the room. One of them passed the A-vote test, but the group won't say who until qualifying ends Friday. Both men had